Lad, if you don't keep that hoe steady, these taters won't be here come harvest. The gentle chiding was wrapped in warmth as old Hampson Proudfoot leaned on his spade, squinting over the misty hills of North Farthing. Bogo Underhill, a hobbit in his early 30s with sun-browned curls and a shirt patched more times than he cared to admit, paused mid-swing and grinned at Hampson. "They'll be the finest taters in the Shire, Ham, and you know it." He wiped a brow already damped with the morning's sweat. "Finest taters need the finest hand, I reckon," Hampson replied with a chuckle. The two hobbits were up early, as always, tending the sprawling potato fields of North Farthing. It was a quiet life, humble and unremarkable, just the way Bogo liked it. He was the unofficial Tater Master of the Shire, a title his friends teased him with, but one he secretly took pride in. Hampson squinted toward the hills. "Look at that sky. Seems drier than it ought to be. When I was a lad, we'd have mists every morning in the spring. Enough to water half the fields just with what was on the grass." Bogo's gaze followed Hampson's, his face softening as he thought about what a rough year it had already been. The rains had been scarce and the fields had started to show it. The green had dulled in places, and Bogo could see the earth, dustier than it should have been. But he held his usual smile, unwilling to let Hampson's words darken his mood. "Aye," he replied, trying to keep a light tone. "But we'll manage, Ham. If the taters are stubborn, we'll just be a bit more stubborn ourselves." Hampson chuckled, shaking his head. "Stubborn as a mule, ye are, lad. But if I were the field, I'd be swayed." The two hobbits shared a laugh, but as they continued their work, Bogo couldn't shake the quiet worry growing in his heart. The fields had been his life for years now, and he'd taken pride in the harvests, year after year. But as he looked out at the dusty rows, he began to wonder if this year would be different. Just as Bogo's thoughts turned somber, a small voice piped up from behind them. "Bogo! Ham! I made something!" Turning, he found little Daisy Tunnelly, no taller than his waist, grinning up at him with a string of wildflowers wrapped into a lopsided crown. She was beaming, clearly pleased with her creation. "What have you got there, Daisy?" Bogo asked, crouching to her level with a warm smile. "A crown," she announced, placing it firmly on Bogo's head. "For the king of the taters," she said with a giggle. Hampson snorted. "King of the taters, eh? Reckon that makes ye lord of the fields, Bogo." Bogo laughed, reaching up to adjust the flower crown. "And as lord of these fields, I decree that all crows shall flee and rains shall come." "Reckon the taters will listen to that?" Hampson asked with a wink. Bogo chuckled but gave a thoughtful look toward the sky. "Let's hope they do." The small exchange lightened his spirits, but even Daisy's sunny presence couldn't shake the quiet dread creeping into Bogo's heart. As the days passed, the dryness only worsened. Bogo tried everything he knew to care for the fields, hauling extra water in the mornings, planting stakes with shimmering ribbons to scare off the persistent crows, even singing the same songs his grandfather had once sung to encourage the plants to grow. One day, while Bogo was carefully watering a wilting patch of potatoes, Hampson approached with a serious look. "Bogo," he began, voice low, "some folks are talking. There's whispers the yield may not be enough to last the season." Bogo's heart sank, but he nodded. "I've seen it too, Ham. Been trying all I can to make up for the weather, but..." He let his words trail off, unwilling to admit the doubt in his heart. You can't work miracles, lad, Hampson replied, placing a steady hand on Bogo's shoulder. Sometimes the fields have their own mind about things. As the weeks went on, Bogo's friends began to notice his worry. The fields, once full of green, began to show more patches of brown as the days grew warmer, and Bogo found himself working from dawn to dusk, doing everything he could think of to save the crops. Late one evening, after another long day, Bogo sat alone in the field, the sky turning to dusk. He didn't hear Daisy approach until she plopped down beside him, clutching a small pail of water. "Bogo," she said, her voice serious in a way that didn't quite fit her young face. "Why don't you let us help?" Bogo looked down at her, a little taken aback. "Help?" Daisy nodded, eyes bright with determination. "Yes, everyone in North Farthing loves your taters. If they knew you were worried, they'd want to help too." Bogo smiled, touched by her words. "But Daisy, the fields are a lot of work. It'd be hard for folk to find the time." "But if everyone helped just a little, it wouldn't be so hard," she insisted, her face lighting up with the idea. "We could bring water, shoo the crows, and sing your songs." The thought of the whole community coming together was almost too much for Bogo to imagine. But as he sat there, looking out at the fields, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. The very next day, Daisy's plan was put into motion. Neighbors came from all around North Farthing, carrying buckets and pitchers, singing songs and laughing together as they worked. Even the oldest hobbits joined in, offering advice on scarecrows and soil and reminiscing about harvests past. Some brought their children, who chased the crows with shouts of glee, sending the blackbirds flapping to the safety of the distant trees. Hampson gave Bogo a wink, as he set up a particularly fierce-looking scarecrow made from an old cloak and a straw hat. "If that doesn't scare him off, nothing will." Bogo watched as his friends and neighbors worked beside him, gratitude swelling in his heart. This wasn't just about the taters anymore. It was about the spirit of the Shire, the way folk looked after one another. And as the days went on, the fields seemed to perk up, as if sensing the care that went into each drop of water, each song, and each hand that worked the soil. Finally, the harvest day came. And while the yield wasn't the largest Bogo had seen, it was enough. Each hobbit who had helped was invited to take their share, and as they dug up the potatoes, laughter filled the fields. The hobbits took home their baskets of taters, full of pride and warmth for having been part of something more than just a harvest. As the sun began to set that evening, Bogo, Hampson, and little Daisy stood together, watching the last of their neighbors walk home with baskets full of potatoes. Hampson gave Bogo a nod. "A season well spent, I'd say." Daisy tugged on Bogo's sleeve. "We did it, didn't we?" Bogo looked down at her and then back to the empty field, feeling a warmth in his chest that went beyond the success of the harvest. "We did, Daisy. And it wasn't just me. It was all of us." They stood in peaceful silence as the golden light faded, and Bogo felt a contentment deeper than any he'd ever known. It wasn't just a harvest. It was a memory, a season marked by friendship and perseverance, a story that would be shared around firesides for years to come.